Mute. Yeah, can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we can see. Yep.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So just to start, I think the schedule has participating futuring. So it's participatory futures or participating to make futures. So that's where I start with. Um, and so I'm from India, and I came to the UK to do my PhD in 2017. While I was still wondering what to do, but I was very clear that I wanted to engage with people who grow food, especially in urban areas. So that much clarity is what I had. And while I came from a very design background with design research, working in technological companies and things like that, I wanted it to be technology critical rather than feeding into the techno solutionism that most of the HCI faculties possess, of looking at future of food and how technology can solve everything. So that's the kind of clarity I came with. Also with my background of working with food and food activists for a while in India, they really I think took my case and bashed me for trying to be an academic and not doing enough work on the ground. So I think my PhD has been a journey of trying to reconcile where I come from and what the technological world can do, or how HCI can even look at reconciling these future visions of technological futures or the future of the city while considering food growing. Yeah, yeah. So this presentation or my PhD work is within human-computer interaction, which is at an intersection of design, computer science, and social science. It has parts of design which talks about how can we design better interactive systems. Computer science, because that's my department, as Tariq mentioned, and social science is a very interesting area for me to embed into my research, because it brings in the politics of growing food in a city and how a future city should be imagined. And within HCI, it fits into the sustainable HCI domain. And as sustainable HCI goes, um, the scholars have tried to say that the definition of sustainability within sustainable HCI literature is so broad that it become meaningless. So there are different ways to understand what is sustainable. So if I even look at the sustainable HCI literature, people come with their own, backgrounds of literature and say this is what we mean by sustainability. And if I talk to, say, a person who grows food or a person who is from an indigenous background, their understanding of sustainability will be very different, and they might just not even use the word sustainability. So, so while looking at sustainable HCI, the problems which dominate the field is that it's very individual focused. It's based on behavior change and persuasive technologies. It's interventionist in nature. People go into the field, do something, and then just come out. And it's mostly hegemonic, expert led, and it imposes a solution onto the users. Um, Also, the way it's structured, it disempowers the individual to create any change, because it's mostly systemic level things that we are trying to do an intervention in. So it's not, so we're not asking the right questions, but we're trying to give a solution with technology. And there's always an implication for design as a takeaway from this kind of research, and the long term systemic perspectives are missing within these conversations of what sustainable HCI actually means. Um, so within this context, my research was about what are the most relevant tools for looking at longitudinal urban sustainability and how can they be most appropriately used to support local grassroots communities in transitioning to sustainable urban food systems. So I was looking at how small communities create these very micro food systems within themselves, and how can technology support these interventions that they are creating in real time within cities. um, so I tried to look at what is urban sustainability, how do we define urban sustainability, and within HCI it's mostly about sustainable cities or eco cities, and which are based on this rhetoric of efficiency, growth and innovation. And it does not include how people perceive what a city means, and it has the kind of enthusiasm towards technology and techno solutionism which devoids the even thinking that technology is not the solution for whatever the problems are. And there's a missing conversation about food while looking at what future cities can be or what urban sustainability means. Because what we are used to is that the food is grown outside the city, and then through a channel of distribution, supply and demand, it's now comes into the city and it's on your shelf and you buy it. So understanding what a hegemonic food system and a local grassroots food growing community can be. So even the hegemonic system describe the current food system as unsustainable, and they ask people to say eat less beef because it has more carbon footprint and all of that. Also asking countries to foot a bill for being more for their carbon emissions that they do. Within these conversations, which are very top down, which are policy driven, there's still an understanding that the way we eat food today is not sustainable, and it leads to a lot of wastage. It leads to it's highly resource intensive, and they also understand that place is an important way of bringing about an alternative thinking of what a sustainable food system can be. So there have been movements in the world about eating local food, buying local, and all of this understanding of what localism is or what slow food is. Um, so on the other hand, if we look at the local grassroots food growing, which is kind of urban growing, and it's it has its own positives which are recognized as well, which is health, mental health, physical health, food security of a city is improved if you grow locally. And then there's local food growing communities are also very important in bringing a local knowledge, understanding of the place, and engendering positive change from the bottom up. Uh, Now, talking about the Indian context, I think the Indian context is a bit different than the Western context. And my work somehow leans on to urban food growing within an Indian context, but and the UK as one of the places. Um, Within India, I have actually looked at a very niche small town which is called Oroville, and Oroville does urban food growing because the way they are structured, the town is built like that. It has the capacity to for food growing within the town itself. Moving back to my slide. So this is a quote from one of my participants, because urban food growing has a lot of issues because they don't have access to land, they don't have resources, the local governments and councils are not ready to give them access to these kind of resources. There's a lot of different stakeholders that come in. There's a lot of uncertainties. Even the whole practice of growing food is very uncertain. It depends on the kind of soil you have, the seeds, and the rain, and everything else which comes with it. Um, so, what people have understood that if the community tries to envision together what their future might be, um, it brings a positive change. It drives the community to create changes on ground, and the local communities kind of work collaboratively in existing informal ways to create these practices in place, to create practices in place which bring about the change. So so while these communities work with a lot of issues, they also think about what is possible for them to do or not do in the future. So that's the domain that I am working in. So it kind of crosses through grassroots communities, future thinking, and everyday practices. So my everyday practice would be food growing, and the grassroots communities are the ones that kind of set up these very small microcosms of an alternate parallel local food system. So talking about the future thinking aspect within this, um, that is where I am trying to see how ICTs um, can move away from these kind of operating norms of techno solutionism and bring about fundamentally different sustainable futures. How can we make it more accessible? How can we make participation more easier through these ICTs? So the methods that I have used through my PhD is kind of research through design, and it's in the wild. I've also linked it to an STS approach of a STS method of sustainable living experiment, which is by Nurtej Mares. And the sustainable living experiment is influenced by Experiments in Living by Stuart Miller, sorry, John Stuart Mill. Um, and how he describes this is how we modify our habits and habitats according to a fixed procedure and the ways of implementing change in our everyday routine and living spaces. So the sustainable living experiment is a method which um, looks at communities who are bringing in practices or changing their practices to bring about change, and how the research then modifies itself um, according to how they are bringing about change. It's also that this community records and makes their experiments available to other people. So either through digital technologies like the web and all of that. Also, they make their information available to other people for replication. So it's this kind of how the community is doing an experiment in themselves, doing research in themselves in a very informal way, and how does formal research uh, kind of move in parallel with what they're doing. The approach that I'm using is I've named it as of now participatory futuring, which is more like participatory speculative approach. So, which is an intersection of participatory design and speculative design. These are two different fields in design altogether, and it kind of works at an intersection of looking at participatory methods and putting a bit of speculative design onto it to kind of have people speculate in the future of what is possible and how they can create change. Um, and obviously, to have socially and politically engaged dialogues while thinking about what is possible for them. Okay, yeah. So yeah. So these are three of my case studies, which is part of my PhD. The first of all is the first one is what does long-term collective negotiation of a vision mean? And this is what I had done in India. This city called Oroville, which has had a vision in place. The city has had a vision in place for the last 50 years. And what I wanted to understand how this vision that was there has impacted how they grow food. The second study was to understand how can researchers facilitate future thinking in urban food growing communities. So if a community is so engaged in the everyday practice of growing food, can we help them think what is possible for them and how they can create change? This was in the UK, and I'm still doing some data collection for my last one on how interactive systems can be designed for situated future thinking for grassroots communities. So, how can we use technology for people to then think about the future? So, how um, actual future thinking workshops are done, are kind of implemented is through a workshop format. But what I am trying to do is how can we use simple communication technologies to then future together to participatively think about the future. So yeah, this is some of my work. So my first study of how does a long-term collective negotiation of vision affects daily practice kind of understands that there's a difference between a vision, a plan, and an action. So if I take the notion of say a smart city, there's always a top-down vision where policy is put in place or a corporation comes in and gives this vision to the people that, oh, we'll have IoT devices connected to cities and all of that. But this vision is quite abstract, and when it comes to implementation, the vision breaks down because there's no understanding of what goes on the ground. But if we look at a bottom up vision which is created by the citizens participatively, it kind of understands the nitty gritties of place. It understands the local knowledge systems. It understands how people can be part of implementing change on ground. um, so there's a difference between how uh, visions, plans, and actions should be articulated within the HCI work as well, or should also be looked at within how visions are made, which are majorly top down. So, so let me just read what I've written. So, vision are abstract, interpretable forms of articulation that create imaginaries. So visions create imaginaries to form connections to individuals and communities, creating the possibility for situated action. Plans, on the other hand, are steps that are needed to be followed to get to a defined goal. These goals can be problematic as they can be devoid of participation and on ground realities. And that's the kind of negotiation that happens when there's a vision and there's an on ground reality that you need to negotiate with. So, so the local food growing community is a microcosm, like I said before, of the sustainable food system that we want to create in the future. And creating movement and commons for individuals and community to build infrastructures through interconnected systems is created through possibilities of institutional involvement. So it's not that the community can scale. Maybe they don't want to scale, but if there's institutional involvement, if there's policy involvement, they would have more power. They would be more empowered to create these changes and create these larger scale sustainable systems. Um, and the way design and technology understands time or future is quite different than how these communities understand time. So it's what a vision is an ideal in the present. It is not part of the future. So, and for sustainability as well, it's not something that you want to reach in the future. It's to be understood here and now and implemented now to even have a sustainable output. So, how policy and technologists understand sustainability is very different than how communities understand sustainability. And the temporality of understanding sustainability is quite different in how top down and bottom up people understand that. Um, so how can so my second study was having these workshops with the communities to understand how they come up with different bottom up futures of food growing within the city. And it had very different activities of walking the neighborhood and visioning the neighborhood through um, uh, fictional scenarios. The other one was mapping the neighborhood to understand where they would be growing food in different areas, what can be possible. The third one was playing a futures game where the game made them visit different futures that they could then understand how would this future scenario impact their food growing. And the fourth one was that they had to create in 3D these future worlds that they would have traveled to in time. So these different activities gave rise to very different futures, which were based on different kinds of fears, aspirations, um, different kinds of assumptions that people have about what is possible and what is not possible. And while I navigated through these utopian and dystopian ideas of the future, most of it was filled with fear. Fear of the future, what is possible, how the governments and technologies would control what lies in the future. um, so there's this also I found out that there's a perpetuating tension between um, vernacular knowledge structures and how us as researchers go on the field to understand what actually future means to these people. And so as I developed these speculative tropes like these fictional scenarios or something, I was also perpetuating the neoliberal understandings of what are preferred futures. So yeah, after analyzing the data and after a long time of being with the data, I could actually see that my fictional scenarios that I went to the field with were in fact from the systemic knowledge structures of research that I was, trying to understand what they meant by sustainability. Then there's a balancing act of participation and speculation. And there's a very fine line between how the workshops could be made more participatory. And so obviously the what I found was if it is agnostic and didactic, it leads into like different kinds of conversations about conflicts and conflicts with the neighbors and all of that. And it has a lot of tensions, but it has also has a lot of potential for bringing out issues and arguments within the community to then get resolved. um, and if you are doing co-speculation together, it can lead to a lot of individual speculation. So if I'm thinking about the future, your point of view on the future is going to be very different. And when it becomes this kind of co-speculative activity, it leads into a lot of tensions which need to be navigated. Um, but if the speculation is situated within a place, within a particular setting of the, say, the neighborhood, it creates these commons for people to then engage with and try and build an actionable outcome. And then, yeah, so the community doesn't think of technology in the way that how say city futures or smart city futures are thought about. They think of them as low and high tech futures. So what I think of low and high tech futures is this assemblage of what they already use and what is promised to them by the technology companies. So I would say that's a rearrangement of these very low tech things with high tech possibilities that can be implemented within the future cities. And then this is my last study that I'm still doing, which is about how interactive systems be designed for participatively thinking about the future. Um, yeah, as I said, that the how we think about the future right now is through workshop based approaches, and they're always even if they use a bit of technology, it's expert led, it's disembodied, and it's not embedded in context. And there's little attention paid to bottom up ways of future thinking and having these embodied engaged political conversations. So right now I'm developing this digitally supported neighborhood visioning walk, and what I'm using is social media technologies like WhatsApp and Instagram. And how I'm asking them to think about the future is through these QR codes. Um, and as they navigate the space, they scan these QR codes, they engage with these speculative ideas on a website, and they talk to each other on the WhatsApp group to kind of share what they think or how they think the future could be. Um, yeah. So the use of WhatsApp as a platform was because I think the community already uses them, and it brings in the possibilities to share photos, drawings, and audio, video, text. Um, and the longitudinal aspect of having this conversation over a longer period of time than just be doing a workshop was what I wanted to look at. um yeah, so my thesis kind of contributes this methodological approach of participatory speculative design. It also looks at developing a framework for vernacular visioning practices, and obviously giving sustainable HCI a point of view on what longitudinal urban sustainability means and what would be the implications if we design a socio-technical system for grassroots communities to start participatively thinking about the future. Yeah. Okay, I'm done.
Thank you, Simran. So there are a few questions, but
Yeah.
let me ask mine one first.
Yeah.
That is the benefit of being a moderator. Because I can see there is a very interesting aspect of this future visioning in your research, and specifically the tools that you at one stage you are showing these all tangible tools with what the people can play, but suddenly your research moved towards ICTs, which is much more pixel based. And
Yeah.
another challenge is that it is much more individualistic. Each person has their own one mobile phone and one screen. So in the workshop, future visioning workshop are much more participatory and collective. So yes, these are the different perspective, like the tangible toward pixels, individual towards collective. What is your thoughts about that?
So I moved very slowly. First, I wanted to understand what does a vision mean for a community, and what does the future mean for a community. And my perception of future got blown off because there's no perception of future. Uh, and then the second one was, okay, now let's try and make these futures, or try and think about these futures of what they think could be possible for food growing. Um, and then the third one is, um, because what I found within my second case study was that we are engaging for a very short time within the workshop, say 3 hours once a month, and we do these 4 workshops. But if we are looking at a ever changing scenario of, say, something like food growing, or if we even develop a vision to put it on ground within action, there are so many uncertainties that need to be negotiated at, say, a everyday or every month basis, which uh, when we think about the future, or even when smart cities think about these future cities, they don't think about, okay, if this breaks down, how do we negotiate that? So there needs to be a constant negotiation of, okay, this is what we went out with, this is what is now possible, this is where we are going. So it's this and that's what I'm trying to do with technology. I'm trying to see if it brings in that aspect of having this longitudinal conversation,
Mm,
of how and even thinking about how the community maybe is receptive of or taking it on. Because if I said this in 2019 that, oh, let's do this something with, technology, the community was not on board. And with the pandemic, because they started doing their face-to-face meetings that they did every month on the streets, on Zoom, it
mm,
was like a leap for them to even adapt to a technology like this. So now, taking a walk with their smartphones is still acceptable. I'm still not sure if the QR codes will be successful,
mm.
but I think that was because everyone in the UK is now scanning these codes to even
Yes.
go to restaurants or get a test for COVID and things like. So they are more receptible to scanning a QR code. And it's paper based, so they don't have to have any kind of gadgets and things like that. It's just your smartphone in your hand. So I think it should work, but I will let you know after 2 weeks.
Thank you very much. So we have I will combine two questions because that's very related to each other. One is by Esme about that whether this pandemic really boosts the moment of this the planting, and then because this has become a hobby, and when you also mentioned about this place is an important aspect of that. And the same question is somehow in Anis one, or related one, is that the how the people are getting the public land, access to the land is another one. Yeah, so
So, so I didn't mention it in my presentation, but most of my work is aligned with the right to the city movement, and a lot of it within the HCI literature is now calling out that a lot of these technologies, like surveillance and RT's technologies, are embedded within um, our normal urban lifestyle, that we're not questioning them. And how can people talk about these in a more accessible manner? Who gets the data? Who controls the data? How can it be more accessible for citizens? And these are the conversations also when we look at land for food growing within urban cities. These are conversations that get missed out while even looking at a future city or a smart city. So if you look at the plans, if you look at the futures, they don't have food growing within the cities. Or even looking at how already existing communities who do this can be part of it. So yeah.
and the last question is by Lilia. She's talking about this urban farming and the vertical farming, the high-rise building farming, that not only just the residential people in the communities, but also the employees in these high-rise building. They're also amongst the people who are working for this farming trend. So, what are your
So
thoughts about these initiatives?
I think every possible change that we can do and every alternative future that we can work on has its own rightful place. And the point of also having technology is to connect these people, because it's not as if these solutions don't exist, but the connections within these smaller communities don't exist at the minute. So it's how do we connect them together to also create this kind of on ground change.
Thank you very much, Simran.